Hi, good morning. Welcome to our fourth interview in honor of Fair Housing Month. I'm Tiara Pitts, your Director of Fair Housing, and this is another weekly special. Of course, we've been running these specials every Monday at 11:30 a.m. on Facebook Live, so be sure to catch our last one next week. And today I have very special guests with me from the Human Affairs Commission who are going to talk to us about how fair housing complaints are initiated, the process, and the investigation process to keep you guys up to date. So can you both introduce yourselves for our audience today?
Ladies first.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Barker. I am a fair housing investigator with the Human Affairs Commission. I've been an investigator there for about 6.5 years in the housing division.
I'm Don Frierson. I'm an investigator and I do intake, just about everything else. And I have been with Fair Housing since the commission was granted the right to investigate fair housing complaints by the legislature. And I think that was 1989.
Wow.
For a while.
So you have been around for quite some time and know some history that we were talking about off camera. So could you just give us a little bit of background on what is the Human Affairs Commission?
The South Carolina Human Affairs Commission was created by the legislature to prevent and eliminate discrimination. We have two divisions, correct me if I'm wrong, Alyssa. On the preventive side, we have technical services and our community consultants who go out and work with the community on discrimination issues. Technical services, they advise businesses on ways to prevent discrimination. And then we have our investigative side, which is the Fair Housing Division and the Equal Employment Division. The Equal Employment Division investigates employment discrimination complaints. We investigate fair housing discrimination complaints.
So the commission was created by the legislature, and I have done research, and me and you were just talking about how the government was actually involved in some housing discrimination, such as redlining and some of the lending. So can you give us a little bit of history on that part of it?
Let me make this distinction. The reason why the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission was created is because the South Carolina legislature felt that South Carolina itself should be dealing with discrimination issues as opposed to the federal government. Because prior to the establishment of the commission, if you wanted to file a discrimination complaint, you had to file it with the federal government. In other words, if you file a complaint with the Human Affairs Commission in housing or employment, you're filing it with the federal government also. The federal government, because we have an agency that investigates those discrimination complaints, they'll waive those complaints back to us and we pay for them. Now, they pay us, I should say. Now, in terms of what you were talking about, the federal role in discrimination, back after World War II, this is an example, there was a man by the, I think his name was Arthur Levitt. They developed what is known as Levitt towns out in the suburbs. The problem with those is that African Americans could not buy those Levitt townhouses. And with the backing of the federal government, they put in these protective covenants, restricted covenants, I should say, which eliminated African Americans from buying those houses. Or if you wanted to sell your house, you could not sell it to an African American. And the federal government also was involved in redlining, which is where you draw a line around particular areas, so you're not going to lend to those people. So that's how the federal government was involved in discrimination against African Americans at the end of World War II. And a Levittown house now is probably worth $300,000.
Wow, so people who were allowed to buy houses, they were able to generate wealth accumulated, while people who were denied that housing
were not able to do that, yeah.
Right, okay, so that can kind of help us see why things are the way they are now and why certain minority groups are so behind and the gap is so wide in home ownership. So that's important for us to understand. So to the actual fair housing complaints, if someone has a fair housing complaint, how are those initiated? What's the first step?
The first step would be to call our office. Well, actually, there are 2 or 3 steps you can go through. You can call the United States Department of HUD. They will take what is known as an inquiry and send that inquiry to us. And based on what they send to us, we will draft a complaint, send it to the person to be signed. They will send it back to us, and an investigation will commence. Or they could call us directly, and we will send them an inquiry and draft a complaint based on what the discriminatory issue is. And of course, if you believe you've been discriminated against because of your race, sex, national origin, religion, disability, familial status, or color, those are the protected classes you can file a complaint with us on.
So what type of proof would a person need to go forward with the complaint?
None.
Okay, so regardless, it's going to be investigated regardless of what the actual complainant brings forward with proof.
Well, let me say this, at the intake stage, they would have to allege that they have been discriminated against because of one of those protected classes that I just mentioned. Because we get a lot of cases that involve landlord-tenant, which has nothing to do with fair housing. They want to fix my place up, they just lazy, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But if they say they didn't fix my place up because I'm African American and a tenant across the street is white, they fix their place up all the time. That's the difference between landlord-tenant and fair housing. So if we establish that they do have a legitimate fair housing complaint, we take it. But at the outset, they don't have to provide any proof at all.
And can either of you kind of walk us through, when you get involved as housing investigators, what type of things are you investigating?
Sure. So once it goes through the intake stage, intake will technically determine that we have jurisdiction, basically that they filed it with us within 180 days from whenever the discrimination occurred. If it's beyond that, then it might get deferred to HUD, or they'd have to file on their own. They also confirm that we have jurisdiction in terms of no exemptions to the property, and that they were actually the person that was harmed. As the investigator, we would confirm that all of that is accurate once we start talking to the parties. But really our goal is to be a neutral fact finder as the investigator. As you asked before about the proof, technically speaking, the onus is on the person who brought the complaint to have proof that there was discrimination. In some cases, that's not really reasonable. They may have suspicions that another tenant or neighbor was given an apartment or was getting maintenance done, but they don't have proof of that. So that's where we can come in and get a little more documentation. We do have subpoena power, and we have a little more authority to get that documentation from the respondents, which would be landlord, HOA, what have you, whoever it is that they've filed against. So our goal is to get evidence from all of the parties involved, to interview all of the parties involved, and then we take all of that evidence once we've gathered it, and we analyze it to see if the information that we have obtained shows that there's been a violation of the law.
So if there has been a violation of the law, what is the next step?
So that gets a little more complicated. What we do is we submit our file for review, and it goes through an internal review process. If the agency feels that there's enough evidence to show there's been discrimination, we send out what we call a cause determination. The parties can then elect to take the case to circuit court, or it can be heard before a panel of our commissioners from the Human Affairs Commission board. If no parties elect, then it ultimately will become a public hearing. So either way, legal action will begin. And we actually file on behalf of the state of South Carolina, not as representation of the person who brought the complaint, which is why I say it gets a little tricky and a little confusing. We are state law enforcement. So when we bring an action, we bring legal action, the Human Affairs Commission versus whoever it was saying that they violated the law.
And do you have attorneys that represent the Human Affairs Commission at a hearing or investigation, or would it just be the investigators who would serve in that role for the Human Affairs Commission?
We do have attorneys. They are involved in the file review process before we issue that determination of cause or no cause if there's not evidence of discrimination. So those attorneys would be bringing those lawsuits. The investigator would technically then become a witness to the case and may potentially have to give testimony in a potential hearing.
So who would be, as you're representing the state, who would be the consumer representative in these situations?
Yeah, so I forget the term that our attorneys have called it. I think it's triangular representation, to get very specific. But basically what the options are for the person is that they can file their own lawsuit with their own attorney and kind of intervene in our lawsuit, or they can ask that our attorney seek damages on their behalf. And so the lawsuit would just say, this person came to us with these complaints, we investigated them and found evidence, and here's what we're seeking on their behalf. The attorney would not technically be representing them, though, so they wouldn't have legal representation. We would just seek damages for them.
And as far as your jurisdiction, is this something that can only go after publicly owned buildings or people who get public funding? Or what if I'm a private landlord who owns, my own house and I'm renting it out? Am I under the jurisdiction of the Human Affairs Commission?
Anybody who rents a house, apartment complexes, real estate companies, anybody involved in the rental of sale of a house can be covered by the law. Now, the exemption comes in if Alyssa here has one house. Technically, she's not covered by the law because the law says you have to own more than 3 houses. She only owns one. But if Alyssa says, I'm not going to rent to you because I don't want disabled people in my house, then she loses those exemptions because she's made a discriminatory statement. And so you can still file against her because she made a discriminatory statement.
And just to clarify, the term housing provider in the law has been very broadly interpreted by courts. It includes HOAs, it includes cities, counties, anyone involved in lending. It includes appraisers. It can even include homeowners insurance. We've seen that come up a good bit in terms of assistance animals, where homeowners insurance or renters insurance won't cover. So basically anyone involved in housing can pretty much
sale or rental.
Can pretty much become involved.
Right, and you mentioned the homeowner's insurance. So I've gotten legal calls where a tenant has a emotional support animal or a service animal, but the specific breed, the landlord says, oh, my insurance won't cover me for that breed, so, you can't have the ESA or the service animal. Is that, have you guys been seeing anything about that? And would that technically be against the fair housing laws?
I guess we could both take that one. Under the Fair Housing Act, the South Carolina Fair Housing Law and the Federal Fair Housing Law, animals are not breed restricted. So if I have an emotional support animal that's a pit bull, you cannot deny me the dwelling because my emotional support animal is a pit bull. Now, when it comes down to insurance companies, you can actually file a complaint against the insurance company. So we would have to, it gets kind of complicated, but just because you say your insurance will not cover this specific animal, that does not necessarily mean we would not take a complaint.
Insurance has the same responsibility to grant an animal. So if it's your direct insurance, you would want to talk to the insurance company and explain, this is my assistance animal, here's documentation to support that. If it's a tenant or a potential buyer or something, then the person would want to pass that along to their insurance company and talk to them about that for them, and explain to them that the insurance needs to make an accommodation. Essentially, they have the same responsibility to accommodate the tenant.
Right, to make that reasonable accommodation to the tenant.
So because this is like kind of a hot topic with the emotional support animals, what is actual verifiable proof of someone having an emotional support animal, and what is a landlord allowed to ask for in these cases where they have a no pet policy but someone has an emotional support animal?
So the South Carolina Fair Housing Law was amended in 2019 to actually add a section specifically addressing that. And it says that you can ask for documentation if it's not readily apparent why the person needs the animal, that you can ask for documentation that addresses whether the person is disabled as defined by the Fair Housing Law, which is that they have a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and that the animal is necessary to alleviate a symptom or assist with that disability in some way. So those are very similar to the ADA questions that you can ask. Are you disabled and do you need the animal, essentially? And that is now codified in the South Carolina Fair Housing Law.
So they can provide medical documentation from their doctor stating that this person is disabled and need the animal. One of the things they cannot do, though, is ask what the disability is. And, we've seen cases where people will go online and get these statements. Alyssa, correct me if I'm wrong, but the law says that the person has to have an ongoing relationship with that doctor. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some type of ongoing relationship, not just you call it up, getting a letter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and those certificates that I'm sure we've all seen floating around, those are generally not considered to be reliable documentation of someone's disability status and need for the animal. Though I will say that under the ADA and the Fair Housing, there is no requirement to register an animal anywhere. There's no requirement to wear a vest or anything like that. It all really comes down to those particular questions from a provider.
And we see more cases about that and disability cases than anything else.
Even nationally, it's like 75% of cases.
Disability cases, yeah.
Wow. So, yeah, I did read that in South Carolina the disability was the highest complaints. Is that still accurate?
Yep.
So what other, outside of ESAs and service animals, what other disability-related complaints are you guys seeing?
I would say there's been a rise in requests for assigned parking spaces at apartments and within HOAs. Individuals typically with physical disabilities in an area where there's not typically assigned parking, requesting that a particular parking space either be created as either altered to be, an ADA accessible space, or a regular parking space like on a corner or close to their unit be assigned to them so that they don't have to walk 3 blocks from wherever else they can find a spot.
And I've seen cases where someone needs a gas-powered motor scooter or something to that effect, and the HOA says, no, you can't have this here. And they have refused to grant a reasonable accommodations. Or someone who needed to park a van in their front yard because of their physical disability, and the HOA has denied that. So, it varies.
So are HOAs something that you guys are seeing people file a complaint against more than other housing providers?
I don't know if I would say as opposed to other housing providers, but we do see a lot of it. And I think a lot of it is because the HOAs don't understand what the Fair Housing Act states.
Yeah, you have a group of people who are, trying to help their community and volunteering their time to be on the board. But often they're not lawyers or they're not housing professionals. So they're just not familiar with the law and don't, even when they have a management company, the management company's job is not to give them legal advice in a lot of cases. So I think we see a lot of situations where it's just misinformation or being uninformed.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, once they understand what the law is, they go ahead and conciliate. And we provide training. It's just a case of them not knowing in most situations.
So when someone is found in violation of the Fair Housing Act through the Human Affairs Commission, what are some of the, we call it discipline here through our process, but what's some of the discipline that is offered through your process?
Well, if one of the things I'll let Alyssa take part of that, but one of the things we try to do, and I want to stress this, is we don't actually, when we get cases, well, we're going to cause this case, we're going to do this because we don't like it. What we try to do is conciliate cases. HUD requires us to try to conciliate cases. And by that I mean, see if there is a middle ground where the complainant and the respondent can meet. And we can conciliate the case without even going to a cause finder. And if we conciliate the case, one of the requirements is that we provide training. And so that is one way we try to affect the respondent to make sure these type of things don't happen again.
And if we're talking about a case that we've already started the legal process on, we've found that there's discrimination, the potential outcomes really vary case by case, and we try to make it specific to the individual case. If it's an animal or an accommodation case, we want to make sure that they create policies for how to deal with reasonable accommodations going forward, as well as, tailor their training to that. We always want to do the training, like he said, creation of policies. We want to make sure if they do create those policies that we have specific, how you're going to send this out going forward. Things that HUD would call affirmative fair housing marketing and things like that. So it really varies from that end, and in what we would do from there. There's also potential civil penalties that could be levied. I think it's somewhere a little over $20,000 for the first violation that could be charged for violating the law. And it goes up from there if there are multiple violations over the years. And then, of course, there's damages to the person, but those are going to vary depending on what actually happened that led to the lawsuit.
So you mentioned you have two different divisions, the preventative and the investigative. So we've been talking about all of the investigation side, but can we talk a little bit about the preventative side and what types of training and education do you guys offer?
Well, I would say the preventative side is handled by us in the Fair Housing Division. And we offer training in terms of fair housing to anybody who wants it. We do outreach such as what we're doing now, and people will call the office sometimes to ask questions about the fair housing law, and we do that. So the ways in which we try to prevent housing discrimination is by trying to get out there and inform the public, realtors, homeowner associations, apartment associations about the law and what the law does and how to prevent having a fair housing complaint filed against you.
And our community relations division also assists us with a lot of that outreach, and part of our mission at the Human Affairs Commission is to foster a mutual understanding among the people of the state. So it's part of their job to go out and create community relations committees within different areas of the state. And they'll go out and host meetings and basically just try to bring people together ultimately, and to have conversations about things going on in the community and what people can do to try to better their community. So if there are any events coming up, the realtors are more than welcome to reach out to our Fair Housing Division and the Community Relations Division to come out and talk to people.
Yes, that's wonderful. We try to do the same thing with education and outreach. As far as do you guys partner with any like-minded groups on housing issues?
Well, if individuals or groups call us, we will certainly provide training to that organization. So from the standpoint of a partnering, we are always available to reach out to organizations or for them to reach out to us. Matter of fact, we just did something with a major housing organization 2 or 3 weeks ago.
2 or 3 weeks ago? We did something a couple of days ago.
A couple of days ago, yeah. We do it all the time.
We partnered with the City of Columbia, Richland County, and South Carolina Appleseed Tuesday to bring a free fair housing seminar. And we have another one coming up at Earlwood Community Park on the 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. And it's free and open to the public. We talk about fair housing rights as well as tenant-landlord.
Wow, is that a part of the Richland One Housing Clinic, or is that something separate?
We were there for that as well.
Okay,
yeah, we were.
Pretty much any time people reach out to us, if they want us to come out and we are available, we will be there.
We'll partner.
Awesome.
We'll partner with anyone, no matter day or night.
Yes, well, thank y'all for coming with us. Of course, we're here for the realtors, so I want to ask if it's any realtor-related complaints that you guys have received and how a realtor could avoid getting a complaint against them for fair housing.
We've had complaints against realtors. As a matter of fact, one recent complaint I saw, a guy walks into inquire about a house. He sees a house he likes, informs the realtor that he likes this house, and he'll be back the next day for the completion of paperwork. He goes back in the next day. The realtor says, well, I'm sorry this house has been sold, but there's another house around the corner you might be interested in. Now, to this guy, that sounds like steering. And so he's going to file a complaint based on steering. Now, whether it was steering or not, I have no idea. But through an investigation, that will be determined. So we've had cases like that. We've had cases where somebody wants to buy a house inside of an HOA, and they have these restricted covenants that you can't have a dog, you can't have this or that. And the real estate agent has been kind of reluctant to broach that. And if that occurs, the complainant can file a complaint against the real estate agent and the homeowners association. So we've seen not a whole lot against realtors, but we see them.
I've definitely also seen realtors be witnesses in complaints and just be advocates for their clients when they recognize that housing discrimination has occurred. Informing their clients and educating them and encouraging them to file a complaint. Obviously, as a real estate agent, you're going to have a lot of that paperwork for them and have, maybe texts or emails with other agents. So it can be a great, asset to the person filing the complaint if you serve as a witness and educate them about their rights.
You ask about how to prevent that, and I always say explain to your clients exactly what it is you do and the process. Early on when I was involved, a lady filed a complaint against a real estate agent because she said she was told that she was pre-qualified, but then was told she was not approved. She didn't know the difference between the two. I didn't either, to be honest with you, at that particular time. But had the real estate agent informed her that when we pre-qualify you, we're just trying to see how much house you can afford. Right. When we pre-approve you, we're trying to ascertain whether or not you actually have the finances for the house. That never was explained to her, so she felt she had been discriminated against. And I always use that as an example. Explain what the process is. Treat that person like you would treat anybody else. And don't go to work if you have a bad day. You think you're going to have a bad day.
Thank you, and thank you guys so much for your time. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to say, or any events that are coming up that realtors or consumers need to know about?
One final thought I would say is that we are getting cases involving appraisers now. As you know, that's a national situation, and I think we maybe have 2 or 3 cases in our office involving appraisals where an African American think that he or she has been lowballed because of their race. So we're seeing a lot of that. So.
And that's another great area where a person's agent can come in handy, because you guys know your markets and you know what the price should be, and what, assuming everything's in good shape, what the house should come back appraised for, close to it. So it can be, a good idea for real estate agents to have an idea. And again, that's where educating, your clients can come in handy, and be an advocate for your clients.
Well, thank you again for your time and for partnering with us. This is the second time we did this, so thank you for coming up to the office today. I appreciate you guys, and I hope that our members are able to learn about fair housing complaints, how they're initiated, how they are investigated, and the opportunities for partnerships and education with the Human Affairs Commission. This won't be the last time that I contact you and reach out to you, so of course, thank you again, and I will see you all next week for our final episode of this special Facebook Live series dedicated to fair housing.